All right, so with that, can we get into some of the questions? Um, I've got two questions here. Arka, maybe we'll start. So from Dan, he asks, are data economies a threat to certification bodies like USP or an opportunity for them? So I think this goes back to where we were talking about the agriculture self-certification potentially of organic, provenance of your product. And yeah, there are a lot of other certification bodies and certification processes out there. So how do you see this either competing with those, complementing those, and what are the opportunities?
Actually, I would love to hear your and Sataj's thoughts on this also, and if Hugh or Nancy are on the call, maybe they can chime in also. But this is a very interesting question because I think that I'll address real quickly the certification process specifically, and then maybe try and generalize this. But I think that what we're seeing here is that there was a requirement for a middle person, for a centralized entity to be able to manage or to be able to act as the third party neutral body who would do the heavy lifting of actually doing something like the certification. And on a very, very different front, I was very heavily involved, for example, with the certification processes that video game developers had to go through to publish on the Xbox platform, and that was one of the biggest challenges that the entire organization faced. And I think that what's happening here is that with systems like data economic networks and similar decentralized transparent systems, we will see more and more that the need for that central body to do the collection and to be that central source of authority will probably decrease. But therein lies the opportunity, because the requirement for having regulatory bodies, the requirement for having folks who are looking at the welfare of the economy, as opposed to for all of the participants, as opposed to just specific parts of the chain, those roles are not going to go away. In fact, they're going to probably become even more important in these systems that are helping us make very important decisions that affect businesses and people pretty significantly in an automated manner. So the oversight and the ability to arbitrate becomes very, very important. And I think what's required there is for these bodies to understand the evolution of their role and to get ahead of it. And honestly, this is no different from for example, what we are seeing in the movie industry, with a lot of the distributors getting cut out of the economy as producers are able to access consumers directly. And so I think that particular pattern is pretty consistent, not just in data economics, but a lot of trends that we are seeing of what technology is enabling. And I think that the opportunity, the need for human intervention is never going to go away. So I think but the opportunities will need to get identified and executed upon, I think, by these bodies. But yeah, I would love to hear, Jennifer, your thoughts, or Sataj, or anyone else,
We
because
have a
I'm
special
definitely not the industry expert here.
special guest we promoted to speaker here to help answer this. So I'm going to hand it off to Hugh Locke. If you want to introduce yourself maybe briefly first as well.
Certainly. Can you see me now?
We can.
Okay.
Yep. Hear you clearly.
Excuse me. So my name is Hugh Locke. I'm the co-founder and president of the Smallholder Farmers Alliance in Haiti. And we are a very happy partner with Lydian as we work to figure out how to value data provided by smallholder farmers as part of our overall operation. And to the specific question with regard to certification, there are now two primary categories of certification that are consolidated at a kind of central location, for lack of a better term. That's organic and regenerative. And organic people are very familiar with. Essentially, it's choosing one of the certification standards, for example, USDA, or a European standard, and then you engage with the licensed agents of those certifying entities to do third-party verification of what you are doing in the field. And the same is emerging with regenerative, but that's kind of a new category. But we're combining both organic and regenerative. And yes, we are going to be direct competition to the certifying agents, the licensed agents of the certifying bodies. But as Arka alluded to, there's going to be a new landscape of participants in this process. Because once you decentralize the certification process and you value the data provided by individual smallholder farmers, and through the Lydian technology, allow the transfer of that value to individual farmers who are implementing these organic and regenerative procedures, then you're taking out the role of the centralized certifiers, but there's going to be a new role for an intermediary body to help with checks and balances. So the primary data input is going to be from the field. That's the big difference. And the primary input of that data compensates the farmers directly for that process, thereby, by our estimate, reducing the total cost of third-party external certification by at least 1/3, transferring the value of savings in that process to the farmers. But we're still going to need third-party validators as part of the larger set of procedures that we're putting in place with Lydian to ensure the validity of the input data. So it's a new day, but it's going to be an interesting process to fill out this landscape. So this is the non-tech person trying to explain this process. And the Lydian team have been very good and patient as they try and help me articulate these things in a better way. So
Hugh, that was fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on that and for being put on the spot so graciously this morning to help us answer that question. Much appreciated. So if it's okay with everybody, I'm going to move on to another question that we have coming from Dan that I'm going to take a shot at fielding this first, Arka, and then I'm going to pass it off to you. So his question is, have you thought about what regulatory mechanisms need to be in place to manage the interconnected network, the equivalent of stock market regulations, et cetera? Yeah, so this is actually, we've thought a lot about this because one of my interests, just coming from an economics and policy background, is around security, national security, information security, how systems like this might be able to be used for good, but also maybe used by unscrupulous actors for nefarious purposes, and how do we prevent that? My first take is that we're trying to build in a lot of technology features to the foundational platform, particularly around the things like auditability, traceability, that we would hope would dissuade people or make it very difficult to kind of use this use these systems in shady ways. Because if you were to use it to do something wrong or illegal or otherwise untoward, it would be very easy for other people to trace exactly what you did with that data and to find out where it went. So actually, Arka and I had a really fascinating conversation after the, I guess, fairly recent, although the news cycle has been through like 200 things since then, news around the SolarWinds hack problem in national security, to say that if they actually had a highly traceable data economics system in place for that kind of data, it would be easier to figure out. I mean, even if the cat gets out of the bag, so to speak, you might not be able to put it back in, but you might be able to see exactly where it went and all the trouble it got into. So at least you have an idea of where your data and where your information has gone. Now, with that said, when we get into the financial regulatory aspect of this, it's a little bit different. We've talked a lot about the idea that if you're trading data assets, like you're trading, so imagine in the future there's a way to trade data assets. Like today we trade equities. I don't think that that is far-fetched to say that might be a reality in the next decade. So if you have a market such as that, you need all of the things that we have in an equities market. We have rules around who can trade things when. We have blackout periods. We have rules around insider trading. We have methods such as ratings agencies that are not, regulatory government bodies, but they are industry bodies that come in and help assess the validity and the strength of the things that you're trading, and whether or not it's actually built on something real or not. Again, to go back to that traceability and auditability point, if you look back at the kind of financial derivatives that led us to the financial crisis of 2008 and these kind of mortgage-backed derivatives, and sorry, I'm trying to remember what movie that is with the where the guy goes in and talks about like, okay, we can take all of this, risk that's
The Big Short.
The Big Short, right? You can take all of like kind of the bad stuff, and if you put it together with like a little bit of good stuff, now we call this, like a better rated derivative. If you think about how these data assets and data asset markets work, and the traceability and auditability throughout that, it's not really possible to build derivatives where you significantly obscure all of the inputs. So I actually am very optimistic about taking, when we say financial derivatives nowadays, it kind of has a bad connotation to it because of what happened in 2008. But I think that we have a new possibility for highly auditable, highly transparent types of financial derivatives that actually really could enable some very exciting and positive types of economic transactions, because it could allow us to invest in some really positive and socially valuable types of outcomes that further the social good. So, just to tie it back to what we were just talking about with agriculture. So say that like what I'm really passionate about is investing in what I think is a really good bet is I want to invest in farmers in Haiti to plant trees or plant plants. There's really no way for me to invest in that on the market these days, other than going to maybe invest in companies that are furthering that, investing in organizations that are furthering that. But there's not like a pure way, I guess, to isolate just the risk from a financial markets perspective of those trees getting planted. And I see data economics and this kind of financial framework that could be built on that, and the derivatives framework that could be built on that is enabling that type of investment. I mean, it's a very similar thing in healthcare. I can invest in a biotech company, but there's no way for me to invest in a particular drug and the performance of that drug. And if there were a way that I could almost go into university labs that are developing early research, or NIH labs, and invest in a molecule from its inception all the way through its commercialization, that would be really exciting to, I think, a lot of people in the science field, and a lot of people who are, biotech analysts, because you're isolating that risk and you're not grouping in all of the risk of, whether or not the CEO said something silly and got in the news and that caused your equities price to take a dip that day. So I do think that we're going to need some new regulatory mechanisms, obviously, but I guess would be the answer, or maybe not obvious, but any kind of new system and network like this, especially when it touches financial markets, needs some regulation. And I think that we would be excited to work with the regulatory bodies to figure out what the scope of that might look like. But at the end of the day, I think there are a lot of features built into this system that should facilitate that and hopefully make it not that big of a lift for the folks participating in these kind of data economies and data economic networks.
I'd like to add just a couple of points there. One of the things, like a lot of the solutions and things that we've been tackling, we look at we're looking to change how the current incentive models, or create new incentive models. Maybe the existing incentive model is broken or doesn't exist at all. And in the process, we're creating this new data economic system, and we're creating these changing or creating new incentives, right? And we go into these sort of knowing or assuming that, hey, we have not planned for every single possible thing. There will be someone who comes along and figures out a way to game the system, right? So like that is just something that we know that there will, we cannot assume that this data economy that we've designed is going to be perfect in every single way. Just like, hey, there's still like pump and dump schemes with stocks and stuff, right? There's like when those incentives exist, we have to be vigilant and just we have to make sure that, hey, as we go through, that the applications we design are robust enough that they can track for these things, they can account for some of these things, and that we remain vigilant and make sure that when these types of things come up, where we create what we think is a nice, clean, well-balanced incentive, but maybe it doesn't turn out that way, that we're able to adjust and that we're able to, make updates and learn from those things.
Yeah, I'll chime in with a tech industry view here, I guess, which is relevant given all the conversations that have been happening around, the moralities of the tech industry and so on, and what the tech industry should or should not be allowed to control or govern. And from our perspective, there are two views that you can take as a company. The first view, and this would be the traditional, technology company view, is that, hey, we just build the technology and we build the science. It's up to you to, design what you will, and to Jennifer's point, use it for good or otherwise, or whatever your incentives might be. And I think there is a certain approach there. I mean, you can think of it as a libertarian approach to some extent, where it's like, hey, let the best data economy win, let the best data assets or the most valuable, the ones that can be, advertised as the most valuable, generally gain the most value. And I think that there is definitely a philosophy that, there could be a company with that philosophy in terms of, hey, we're just going to put the technology and science out there and let it grow. And, it's not up to us to decide what it gets used for. But that's why, from our perspective, we are not just building the data economic operating system. We're not just building Lydian. We are the data economics company because we are interested in the science and its implications and its impact overall. So we are actually interested in what it gets used for. We are actually interested not just in building the science and the technology and seeing what the world does with it, but actually having a little bit of an influence and impact on making sure that it's used for, some of the means and ends that we are passionate about as individuals and as an organization. So on one hand, we want to make sure that we build the toolkit and the science in a way where no matter what kind of data economy you're trying to create, or no matter what kind of data sets you're dealing with, you have the right tools to build the most valuable data sets, to advertise the most valuable data sets in the most valuable data markets, and get recognition for the hard work that you're doing to generate that data. The farm example comes to mind. How much latent value are farms and farmers losing out on just because we can't track the impact back to that individual farm? So, that kind of stuff is very important to us, that we do it ourselves, that we enable our partners to do it. And, and eventually with that broad propagation model, enable everyone to do it. But at the same time, to Jennifer and Sataj's points, we are very passionate about making sure that, that data economics is used for what ultimately we can all think of as positive outcomes.
May I just make one additional point on that? Up to this point, smallholder farmers, and when you step back and look at the collective body of smallholder farmers, there are 500 million smallholder farms around the world. And the people who live and work on those farms add up to a third of the entire global population. So a not insignificant number of people. And they have been completely marginalized in terms of looking at agriculture as a market sector globally. And so something like data economics and thinking of it in terms of the impact of regulatory bodies, this would represent the first time that smallholder farmers will be at the table for discussions about things like regulatory oversight and the relationship of regional and global markets and tariffs and taxation. So for us, the anticipation of having to comply with regulatory bodies is an exciting one because we've never been there. So this allows us a seat at the table.
Thank you so much for sharing that perspective as well. And I mean, to me, that just calls back to earlier when I was chatting about some of the policy implications of what happens when you democratize data and democratize the economics that go along with data. The people who are generating the data, generating the information, because really they're the ones critical to generating the outcomes, can have a little bit more of a voice than they could before. I think that's a really exciting social and policy implication, and one that we look forward to exploring a lot more. So I would just say this is another opportunity for us to plug the textbook project that we're working on. So even if you're not you don't have to be a computer scientist to participate in that. If you are an economist or a political science thinker or philosopher type, we would also welcome your help in exploring all of the social and policy implications of this science. Yeah, as we said, we hope that this will be used to promote positive social outcomes and positive business outcomes. All right, I don't know that we have any other questions in the queue. So I guess we can really start to wrap it up. Any other thoughts, Arga, Surtaj, or any questions from audience? This is your last chance to ask us questions today, but we'll be back with you soon.
I'll just say, yeah, thanks once again for everybody for joining. We're really looking forward to all the challenges and everything that lie ahead, and as well as just sharing more and hopefully getting you guys as excited about this as we are.
Thank you once again to our audience. Thank you to the team at the Data Economics Company who helped us put this all together. Couldn't do it without your help. And thank you to Hugh for jumping in once again, and to all of our partners. None of this would be possible without you. So thank you so much to everyone, and we will see you soon.
Absolutely. Thank you.